It's 2:16 in the morning, September 28, 2017, Poughkeepsie, New York. A patrol officer named Richard Cecily is sitting at a red light on Taft Avenue when he notices something strange. A car is stopped dead at a green light, not moving, just sitting there, in the middle of the night, engine running, going nowhere. He pulls up, approaches the vehicle. Behind the wheel is a young woman, early 20s, dark hair. Two small children are in the back seat, both awake, both quiet in a way that doesn't feel like sleep. The woman looks at him, and something in her face stops him cold. She tells him she needs help. She tells him something has happened at her apartment. She tells him her name is Nicole Adamando. What Officer Cecily doesn't know yet, what no one on that street knows yet, is that inside that apartment, a man is dead, shot once, lying on the couch with his legs stretched out, hands resting on his stomach, head on a pillow, like he was sleeping. And the bathtub is filling with water, and a laptop is submerged beneath the surface, cracked, broken. Nicole Adamando will say she had no choice, that she shot him, or he would have killed her, that she had been living in terror for years, and that night was the night she either escaped or died. The prosecution will say something very different. This is the story of Nicole Adamando, and depending on what you believe, she is either a survivor who finally fought back or something far more calculated. To understand what happened on that September night, you have to go back to before the gun, before the blood, back to when Nicole Adamando and Christopher Grover were just two young people who coached gymnastics together. Nicole was born on November 19, 1988, in Dutchess County, New York. People who knew her growing up described her as quiet, artistic, emotionally sensitive, the kind of person who kept things inside, who felt deeply but rarely spoke about it. She had an interest in photography, in crafting, in creating things with her hands. Friends remembered her as gentle. What most people didn't know, what would only surface years later in court, is that Nicole had endured significant trauma long before she ever met Christopher Grover. She would later testify that she experienced sexual abuse as a child. Psychologists who later evaluated her argued that this early trauma shaped her in fundamental ways. Her tolerance for pain, her difficulty recognizing danger, her tendency to stay in situations that others might have fled. Christopher Grover was born around 1987. He grew up in the same Poughkeepsie area. People who loved him described him as a devoted father, hardworking, someone who was deeply present in the lives of his children. His family would later grieve his death with a grief that was real and raw and unambiguous. And then there were the people who knew the other side of him, or claimed to. The two met around 2008 at Mr. Todd's Gymnastics in Poughkeepsie. They were both instructors. He was 21, she was 19. They began spending time together. Friends saw a young couple, easy and comfortable. A relationship that looked, from the outside, entirely ordinary. For a while, maybe it was. By 2012, Nicole was pregnant with their first child. They moved in together. The apartment in Poughkeepsie became their shared world. And for Nicole, it would become something else entirely. According to her testimony, the abuse began in 2013. She described it as starting slowly, the way these things often do, a raised hand, an act she didn't consent to, a threat quietly delivered so the children wouldn't hear. Then, over time, she said, it escalated into something systematic and severe. Nicole would later testify that Christopher subjected her to physical violence, beatings that left marks she had to explain away, strangulation, burns from heated objects pressed against her skin, and sexual violence that she described in detail during trial, in a courtroom full of people, her voice barely steady. She said he filmed these acts. She said he posted explicit images of her online without her knowledge or consent. She said he used those images as a weapon, to control her, to humiliate her, to remind her of what he could do. In 2015, their second child was born. The family of four, Nicole, Christopher, and two small children, continued to occupy the same apartment. From the outside, neighbors saw a young family. The children were loved. The apartment was kept. Inside, according to Nicole, something was rotting. That same year, 2015, a police report was filed that would later gain attention in court. Investigators described the relationship as, quote, a high-risk domestic relationship. This wasn't hidden information. It was in the record. It existed. And yet Nicole and Christopher remained together. She would later explain why. She said he had told her that if she left, he would kill her, that her children would grow up without a mother, that she had nowhere to go where he couldn't find her. This is a pattern that domestic violence researchers have documented for decades. The question of why victims stay is one of the most misunderstood questions in abuse cases. The answer almost never has anything to do with wanting the abuse to continue. It has everything to do with fear. Over the years between 2013 and 2017, Nicole Adamando did not remain entirely silent. She reached out to a therapist. She saw medical professionals. She spoke to domestic violence counselors. She had contact with a victim services therapist named Sarah Caprioli, who reportedly brought her concerns to law enforcement. Medical records introduced in the legal proceedings documented injuries. Photographs were taken. Healthcare providers, including midwives and nurses, recorded observations consistent with physical trauma, bruises, burns, genital injuries. Friends saw things too. People around her noticed something wasn't right. Some reached out. Some offered to help. Some told her she could leave, that there were places she could go, that she had options. But Nicole didn't file formal charges. She signed some reports but not others. She stayed. The prosecution would later use this against her. If she had resources, advocates, therapists, friends, why didn't she leave? Why, with a safety plan available, with people ready to help, did she remain in the apartment with her children until the night she pulled a trigger? The defense had an answer. Because coercive control doesn't work the way outsiders think it does. Because a safety plan means nothing to someone who genuinely believes that leaving will get her killed. Because trauma does not respond to logic. Because the most dangerous moment for a domestic violence victim is not when they're being hit. It's when they try to leave. Neither argument is easy to dismiss. Both contain a version of truth that is uncomfortable in different ways. What we know is this. By September 2017, Nicole Adamando had been living in this situation for the better part of 4 years, and something was about to break. The day before Christopher Grover died, there was a visit from Child Protective Services. The CPS visit, occurring roughly 24 hours before the shooting, is described in court documents and reporting as a significant event. A caseworker came to the apartment. Nicole was present. The children were present. Nicole did not disclose the abuse to the CPS worker during that home interview. In court documents, this visit is described as a triggering event, the thing that set the final night into motion. Whether it triggered panic in Nicole, a calculated decision, or simply the unbearable pressure of a secret she had been carrying for 4 years, the record doesn't fully say. What the record says is that after the CPS worker left, the tension inside the apartment did not release. It coiled tighter. The exact timeline of what happened inside those walls on the evening of September 27, 2017, is not fully available in the public record. There are no surveillance cameras inside the apartment. There is no minute-by-minute log. What exists are Nicole's account, the physical evidence, and the conflicting interpretations of both. Nicole said that Christopher threatened her that night, that he told her she wasn't going anywhere, that he produced a gun from the cushions of the couch, that a confrontation broke out, that she grabbed the weapon, that she fired. And that brings us back to Taft Avenue, to the green light no one was moving through. At approximately 2:16 in the morning on September 28, 2017, Officer Richard Cecily found Nicole Adamando in her car. Her 2 children were in the back. She told him she needed help. She told him something had happened. Officers responded to the apartment. What they found when they walked through the door would become the center of a years-long legal battle. Christopher Grover was lying on the couch, on his back, legs stretched out straight, hands resting on his midsection, head on a pillow. He had been shot once, in the head. The shower was running, the bathtub was filling with water, and inside the bathtub, submerged beneath the surface, was a laptop. Broken. The responding officer, Murray, recorded these observations carefully. And those observations, the position of the body, the running water, the drowned laptop, would become 2 of the most contested pieces of evidence in the entire case. Nicole was taken in for questioning. She never denied that she had fired the gun. She said she had done it in self-defense. She said it was, in her own words, kill or be killed. She also reportedly said something to Officer Cecily that night that would later be used against her. Something to the effect that this was the least violent he'd ever been that night. A phrase the prosecution would return to again and again. Nicole Adamando was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, first- and second-degree manslaughter, and criminal possession of a weapon. She was a 28-year-old mother of 2. Her children were taken from the home. Her life, already fractured, broke apart entirely. The preparation for trial took nearly 2 years. During that time, her defense attorneys assembled what they believed was a substantial record of the abuse Nicole had endured. They gathered medical records, photographs of injuries, testimony from healthcare providers, statements from friends and advocates. They prepared an argument centered on battered woman syndrome, the well-documented psychological phenomenon in which prolonged abuse fundamentally alters how a victim perceives danger and calculates survival. Prosecutors prepared their own case. They had a crime scene that told a story, a man shot in the head while apparently at rest, a scene that, from their perspective, looked arranged, a laptop submerged in water, the devices that allegedly held proof of the abuse containing no such proof at all, family photographs, nothing more. They had a defendant who, despite having access to multiple support systems, had remained in the relationship until the night she chose to end it with a gun. The trial began in March 2019. The courtroom in Dutchess County became, for several weeks in early 2019, a place where 2 radically different stories were told about the same life. The defense told the story of a woman who had been tortured, physically, sexually, psychologically, for years. They presented photographs of injuries. They introduced medical records. They brought in witnesses who described seeing Nicole with bruises, with burns, with the hollow look of someone who has stopped expecting safety. They called on psychological experts to explain how trauma rewires a person's capacity to perceive danger, to seek help, to leave. They argued that on the night of September 27th, Nicole Adamando was not a murderer. She was a woman who had finally reached the moment she had always feared, the moment when Christopher Grover was going to kill her, and she had acted first. The prosecution told a different story. They pointed to the couch, to the posture of a man who was not attacking, not threatening, not in motion. A man at rest, shot once at close range. They pointed to the laptop in the bathtub and argued that the device didn't end up there by accident. They argued that no evidence of the alleged abuse videos was found on any recovered device. They argued that if Christopher had truly been filming and weaponizing images of Nicole, that evidence would exist somewhere. And it didn't. They pointed to the phrase Nicole had said to Officer Cecily, the least violent he'd ever been. If she feared for her life in that specific moment, why those words? They brought their own expert, who argued that Christopher Grover did not fit the profile of a classic domestic abuser. No threatening texts in the evidence record. No pattern of digital monitoring or isolation that would be consistent with coercive control. He had allowed Nicole to attend therapy, to maintain outside relationships. None of it, the prosecution argued, fit the picture she was painting. The jury deliberated, and on a day in March 2019, they returned a verdict. Guilty, second-degree murder, illegal possession of a firearm. In 2020, Judge Edward McLaughlin sentenced Nicole Adamando to 19 years to life in prison. She was transported to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women. Almost immediately, her legal team began fighting the sentence under a relatively new New York law, the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, or DVSJA. This law was designed specifically for situations like Nicole's, allowing courts to reduce sentences when a defendant can demonstrate they were a victim of domestic violence and that the abuse was a contributing factor in the crime. It was a law that existed on paper, but in 2020, it had rarely been tested in a meaningful way in the real world. Nicole Adamando's case would change that. In 2021, an appellate court ruled that the original sentence was excessive. Under the DVSJA framework, her sentence was reduced dramatically, from 19 years to life down to 7.5 years. Outside the courtroom, tens of thousands of people had signed petitions calling for Nicole's release. Advocacy organizations had rallied around her case as a landmark example of what they called criminalized survivors, people who committed acts of violence after years of abuse and who were then prosecuted and incarcerated in ways that advocates argued failed to account for the context of that violence. Requests for clemency from the governor's office were considered. They were not granted. Nicole Adamando served her sentence at Bedford Hills. She remained in contact with her children throughout. She spoke in interviews about domestic violence awareness. She described the separation from her children as the hardest part of everything she had endured. On January 4, 2024, Nicole Adamando walked out of Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, released on parole after serving the reduced sentence. Her children were there. The case that had begun with a traffic stop at 2:16 in the morning had finally, in one sense, come to its end. Forensic and legal analysis. From a purely technical and legal standpoint, the Adamando case is a collision between two legitimate frameworks for understanding the same set of facts. The self-defense claim under New York law requires that the defendant reasonably believe deadly force was immediately necessary to prevent imminent deadly physical force from being used against them. That word, imminent, is where the entire case fractures. For the prosecution, imminence meant, what was happening at the exact moment the trigger was pulled. And at that moment, Christopher Grover appeared to be lying on a couch. The physical evidence supported a man who was at rest, not attacking. The defense argued that imminence, especially in the context of prolonged intimate partner violence, cannot be understood through a single frozen frame. When a person has been systematically abused, threatened, and told they will be killed if they try to leave, the threat is not confined to moments when a fist is raised. The threat is continuous. It permeates every moment of cohabitation. Psychological research into battered woman syndrome and coercive control supports this framework. This legal tension between classical self-defense doctrine and the psychological reality of long-term abuse is not unique to Nicole's case. Courts across the country have struggled with it for decades. The evidence exclusion issue also matters here. Reports indicated that some evidence of abuse was not fully presented to the jury. When that happens in a self-defense case involving domestic violence, it can fundamentally alter what a jury is able to understand about the defendant's state of mind. The laptop presents its own forensic question. Prosecutors argued its presence in the bathtub, broken and submerged, pointed to scene staging. But the defense could, and did, argue the opposite, that a man who had been filming and distributing abusive content might have been in the process of destroying evidence when confronted. Neither interpretation is provably false. Both are plausible readings of the same object. The DVSJA reduction ultimately acknowledged what the original sentence had failed to fully reckon with: that Nicole Adamando's life history was relevant not only to sympathy, but to the legal calculus of culpability. Psychological analysis. The psychological dimensions of this case are layered in ways that a verdict cannot fully resolve. Nicole Adamando presents a profile that is consistent, though not conclusively, with someone who experienced prolonged trauma beginning in childhood. Research is clear that early abuse shapes threat perception, attachment patterns, and coping strategies in lasting ways. Someone who learns early that those with power over them will sometimes harm them may develop an adapted tolerance for danger that outsiders later read as complicity. The pattern of help-seeking followed by withdrawal, therapists, DV counselors, police contact, but no formal charges, is not evidence of dishonesty. It is one of the most well-documented behavioral signatures of intimate partner violence. Disclosure is dangerous. Partial disclosure is sometimes the only disclosure a person feels they can risk. The gap between knowing you're being harmed and believing you can stop it is, for many people, enormous. Christopher Grover remains psychologically ambiguous in the record. The prosecution's expert argued he didn't fit the standard coercive control profile, and this is an argument worth taking seriously. Abuse does not always conform to textbook presentations. Abusers can be loving in some contexts and brutal in others. The absence of threatening texts doesn't mean the absence of threats. The absence of digital evidence of recorded abuse doesn't mean recordings didn't exist. And yet, the ambiguity is real, and a jury is entitled to weigh it. What is perhaps most psychologically significant is the CPS visit and its aftermath. The escalation that appears to have occurred in the hours following that visit is consistent with what crisis intervention research calls a triggering event, a moment when the precarious equilibrium of an abusive household suddenly becomes intolerable to one or both parties. Whether that triggered terror, calculation, or some combination of both in Nicole Adamando's mind remains, in the end, unknowable. Here is the timeline, compressed. 2008. Nicole Adamando and Christopher Grover meet at Mr. Todd's Gymnastics in Poughkeepsie, New York. 2012. Nicole becomes pregnant with their first child. They move in together. 2013. According to Nicole's testimony, the abuse begins. Physical violence, sexual assault, threats, recordings. 2015. Their second child is born. A police report describes the relationship as high risk. Nicole has contact with therapists and domestic violence advocates but does not file formal charges. 2017. Ongoing. Nicole continues living with Christopher and their two children. She reaches out to multiple support systems but stays in the relationship. September 27, 2017. CPS visits the home. The visit is later described as a triggering event. That night, Nicole says Christopher threatens her with a gun. She fires. He dies. 2:16 a.m., September 28, 2017. Officer Cecily finds Nicole stopped at a green light on Taft Avenue with her children in the car. Officers respond to the apartment and find Christopher Grover dead on the couch, the shower running, and a laptop submerged in the bathtub. 2019. Trial. Jury convicts Nicole of second-degree murder and illegal possession of a firearm. 2020. Sentenced to 19 years to life. Sent to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. 2021. Appellate court reduces sentence to 7.5 years under the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, a landmark ruling for that law. January 4, 2024. Nicole Adamando is released from prison on parole. The case of Nicole Adamando does not offer the kind of resolution that satisfies. Christopher Grover is dead. He was a father. Whatever he was privately, he was that. His family lost him. His children lost him. Nicole Adamando spent years of her life in prison. Her children lost years with their mother. Whatever she was privately, victim, killer, both, she was also that. What the case does offer is a question that the legal system is still learning to answer. When the violence happens slowly, over years, in private, with no witnesses, how do you weigh a moment against a history? How do you measure imminence when fear has no off switch? These are questions that matter beyond this case. They matter for every person who has ever stayed somewhere dangerous because leaving felt more dangerous still. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. This case is one that I think deserves serious attention, not because the answers are easy, but because they aren't. If you want to see more cases like this one, cases where nothing is simple and everything matters, subscribe and hit the bell. Leave a comment below. What do you think? Was this self-defense? Was justice served? I'll see you in the next one.